Snow over the bighorns, and a wagon stopped dead in the frozen mud of a town square. On its bed a woman stands, roped at the wrists, a burlap sack pulled down over her head, and the whole crowd has come to watch. Listen close. They are not bidding on a bride. They are bidding on a thing they have been told to fear. A thin man works the wagon like a knife works a rope. Some call her cursed, he says. He calls her cheap. The numbers come up small and lazy out of the cold. And in the front row, a gentleman in soft gloves rests one finger on a closed folder of papers and does not blink. She does not fold. Under the sack, her chin stays up. Then the back of the crowd moves. Boots in the snow, a shadow the size of a doorway, and a voice low as winter says one word: 30. The fire had burned down to a low red breathing in the hearth, and the man stood very still, because the woman in front of him had just lifted the rough sack off her own head, and he had been told by everyone in the valley exactly what he would find underneath. He had been told she was cursed. He had been told her face would turn the milk and crack the windows and kill any man fool enough to look at her straight on. I had paid in gold for that face. Paid without seeing it, paid because he could not stand the sound of the bidding for 1 second more. And now the sack was on the floor, and he forgot how to breathe. But that is the end of a morning that started much worse, and if you want to understand the gasp, you have to start with the cold. So stay with me. Sit close to the fire, because this one is worth hearing all the way down to the last word. It started on the coldest morning the territory had seen in 9 years. Coldwater, Wyoming, 1884. A mining and cattle town wedged in the shadow of the Bighorn Mountains, where the wind came off the peaks like it had a grudge and the snow did not fall so much as arrive sideways with intent. The town square was not really a square. It was a wide patch of frozen mud between the bank and the church, and on most mornings it held nothing but wagon ruts and a few stubborn chickens. That morning it held a crowd, and a wagon turned sideways in the mud, and, on the wagon, a thin man in a good coat, stamping his boots, breathing steam, holding a sheet of paper like it was a deed to heaven. His name was Hollis Dern. He smiled the way a knife smiles. He had done this before. Behind him on that tilted wagon bed stood 3 women in a row, roped at the wrists. The first was a widow, 40 maybe. Her husband had died owing the bank, and the bank had decided that a debt does not die just because the man does. She kept her chin up. She did not last long up there. A rancher bought her for the kitchen and the laundry and whatever else a rancher decides he is owed, and she stepped down without a sound, and that silence was the loudest thing in the square. The second was older, gray at the temples. She had been a seamstress until her hands stopped working in the cold, and a town does not feed hands that cannot sew. She went for less than the widow. A storekeeper took her for the back room. She did not keep her chin up. She had nothing left to keep it up with. The crowd watched all of this the way people watch weather. Some shameful, some bored. The women turned their faces away. The men chuckled at Dern's jokes. The preacher stood at the edge and said not one word, which is its own kind of word. And in the front row in a chair brought out special sat a man who did not chuckle. I was, perhaps, 48, silver at the sideburns, a coat that cost more than the bank made in a month, soft leather gloves, a gold watch chain catching the gray light. He sat like the cold could not reach him, like nothing could. He held a folder of papers in his lap, and he kept it closed, and he kept one gloved finger resting on top of it. the way a man rests a hand on something he owns. His name, the whole valley would tell you, was Edmund Crane. Remember that name. And remember the folder. Both will matter more than you think. Beside Crane on her feet, because sitting was for the weak, stood Adeline Foss, the mayor's cousin, the church organist, the keeper by her own appointment of everyone's morals but her own. She watched the wagon with her mouth pursed like she had bitten a lemon and decided to blame it on someone else. Then Dern brought out the third woman, and he changed his voice, because the third one came with a story. They did not lead her up gently. They half pushed her, and she came up the 2 crooked steps onto the wagon bed with a sack over her head. Burlap, cinched loose at the throat with a length of rope. Her wrists were bound in front of her. The crowd, which had gone quiet between sales, made a sound, a low, ugly, hungry sound. Because they had heard about this one. Dern lifted his paper, filled his chest, and he sold her the way you sell a poison. She was found near the Crane Road. 3 weeks back, he said, with no people and no purse and a story nobody believed. She gives her name as Hartwell, schoolteacher's girl, she claims, from back east somewhere, came out to be married, she claims. He smiled, the knife smile. Except every man she ever stood next to has met an early grave, Dern said. Her own father went off the mountain road in the dark. 2 grooms promised to her are dead before the wedding. Folks who have seen her face do not sleep right after. So I will be merciful and leave the sack on. He let that sit. Some of them call her cursed, Dern said. Me, I am a practical man. I call her cheap. The crowd laughed. The woman did not move. And here is the thing nobody in that square wanted to look at too long. She was not bent. A cursed woman. A shamed woman, a woman who believed one word of what was being said about her. She folds. She curls in. She makes herself small so the world will hurt a smaller target. This one stood straight, chin lifted under the burlap, shoulders square, bound hands held quiet at her waist, as if the sack were a veil and not a cage. As if she were waiting out a storm she fully intended to survive. Inside the sack it was dark, and it smelled of grain and her own breath, hot and close, and she counted. Don't shake. Do not let them see 1 inch of shake. You practiced this. On the train, in the cell, in the dark. The not shaking. Count the breaths. Count to keep from screaming. 1, 2. He is out there somewhere in that crowd, watching the silver one, watching to see if you will break and say his name. Don't. 3, 4. If you say his name, they call you mad and the rope gets shorter. 5. Her name was Marin Hartwell. She was 24 years old, and she was not cursed. She was hunted. There is a difference, and almost nobody alive knew it. The bidding started at $5. It is a hard thing to write, and a harder thing to have stood near. A grown woman, a reading, thinking, grieving woman. And the numbers came out of the crowd, small and lazy, the way men haggle for a lame mule. 5, 7. A drunk near the rail called 8 and laughed at himself. I need someone to scrub, a man said like she was a brush. 10, said a voice, and the bid stalled there, because at 10, a man expected to keep the sack on forever and never have to wonder what he had brought home. And Edmund Crane in his good chair with his soft gloves and his closed folder smiled a very small smile, because this was working, because in 1 hour She would belong to some grateful brute, with no questions and no curiosity, and she would disappear into a back room or a far ranch, and the school teacher's daughter, who knew too much, would simply stop being a problem. Quietly, legally, with his hands clean and gloved, he had planned it that way. He planned everything that way, until the back of the crowd moved. Now, you have to understand the size of the man for the rest of it to make sense. He came through the crowd, the way weather comes through a canyon. People did not so much step aside as get moved aside by the simple fact of him. He stood over 6.5 feet, shoulders that filled a doorway, a heavy buffalo coat, dusted white with snow, dark hair too long shoved back off a face that had been carved out of hard winters and harder years, a jaw set like he was biting down on something, eyes the color of old whiskey, and just as warm and just as dangerous if you took too much. He had a quiet about him. That was the first thing, not the quiet of a shy man, the quiet of a man who had used up all his loud a long time ago, in places he did not talk about, and had decided the rest of his life would be spent saying as little as possible. His name was Silas Calder. He had come down off the mountain for flour and salt and powder before the passes closed. That was all. He had a list. He had 2 brothers waiting by the wagons. He had a girl of 6 up at the cabin who needed boots, and a mother, and neither of which he knew how to buy. He had absolutely not come down for a wife. But he had a sister once, and he knew exactly what a sack over a woman's head meant, because the worst day of his whole life had started with a story just like this one told. Just the same way, by a smiling man on a wagon, and he had been too far away and too late. So he heard the number 10, and something in his chest, something he had nailed shut years ago, tore loose. 30, Silas said. The word cut the square in half. The crowd turned. The drunk shut up. Hollis Dern's smile slipped for the first time all morning, and Edmund Crane sat forward in his chair, just slightly, just enough. 30, Dern said, recovering, because a sale is a sale. That is a fine bid, mister. You will not even have to look at what you bought. Want me to leave the sack on for you wedding gift? I am buying the work, Silas said, not the face. Marin inside the dark went still, not afraid still, listening still. Because no man had said a clean sentence about her in 3 weeks, and that one had been almost clean, and her ears were starving for it. The voice was low, deep. It did not shout. It did not need to. It was the kind of voice that made a room lean in, and the room leaned in. 40, Crane said. He said it without standing, without raising his hand. He said it the way a man flicks lint off a sleeve, and his gloved finger never left the folder. The crowd murmured. Why would the richest man in the valley want a cursed nobody? It made no sense to them. It made perfect sense to him. He could not let her walk into a stranger's house where she might talk. He had to own her himself, quietly, today. Silas did not look at Crane. He looked at the woman, at how straight she stood, at the rope on her thin wrists, at the way her chin stayed up inside that sack like a flag nobody had managed to pull down. 50, Silas said, in gold. And he reached into his coat, and he took out a leather pouch, heavy, and he did not toss it to Dern. He set it down on the wagon bed, at her bound feet. The coins clinked, solid, yellow, real. It was a strange thing to do, a theatrical thing almost from a man who hated theater. But there was a meaning in it, even if Silas could not have told you what, and Marin felt it land near her boots like a small warm weight in a cold world. He had put the money at her feet, not at the seller's, at hers. The square was silent. Crane's gloved finger tapped the folder once, twice. He could go higher. Of course he could. He could buy this whole town twice over. But a man who has built his entire life on looking respectable cannot afford to be the rich gentleman who fought a mountain trapper to the death over a cursed woman in a sack. People would ask why. People asking why was the only thing in the world Edmund Crane was afraid of. So he settled back in his chair. He let the gloved hand go loose, and he smiled, small and cold, and he looked across the square at the buffalo coat, and Marin could not see it, but she could feel the temperature drop the way you feel a cloud cross the sun. This is not finished, that smile said. Sold. Dern barked, snatching up the gold before the mountain man could change his mind. She is yours, friend. Don't come crying back when you see what is under there. Silas Calder climbed up onto the wagon. He took out a knife. The crowd held its breath, and he cut the rope off her wrists. Just that. He did not lift the sack. He did not gawk. He cut her loose, and he stepped back to give her room. And he said one word, quiet only for her. Walk. She walked. Down the two crooked steps, into the frozen square. Past Adeline Foss, who drew her skirts aside like the cursed thing might be catching. Past Edmund Crane, who watched her go with a patience that should have frightened everybody, and frightened no one, because they did not know what he was. Marin did not stumble. She walked beside the giant in the buffalo coat sack, still over her head spine, still straight, and she left cold water under a sky the color of a gun barrel, and not one soul tried to stop them. So now you know how a man comes to buy a woman he was promised would curse him. But you do not yet know who she is or who he is or what is hidden in a worn little book she carries against her ribs. Keep listening, because all three answers are coming, and one of them will change everything. There were two more men with the wagons and 2 horses to spare, and Marin found this out when the giants stopped at the edge of town, and a second voice said flat as a frozen pond, "You bought a wife." "I bought a person off a block," Silas said. "Same thing in this town," the voice said. "Not to me." The second man was nearly as tall, leaner, harder around the mouth, with eyes that went to the tree line and the rooftops and the alleys before they ever went to a face. A man who had learned that danger comes from the edges and watched the edges always. This was Amos Calder, 30, the brother who carried the rifle and did the worrying so the others would not have to. He looked at the sack. He looked at his brother. He did not look pleased. "She comes with a curse," Amos said. "Whole town says so. Whole town says a lot of things. The town says she gets people killed, Sai." Marin, inside the dark, felt the words like small stones. And then a third voice, younger, warmer, slightly out of breath the way a man is when he reads more than he runs. Or said the third one, "The town is wrong and a frightened woman is standing in the cold while 2 grown men argue about her like she is a horse with a bad leg." This was Micah Calder, 28, the youngest, the one with ink on his fingers and a book in his saddlebag and a way of seeing the soft thing in a hard moment. He stepped close. He did not touch her. He spoke to where her face would be, under the burlap, gentle and direct. "Ma'am," he said, "there is a horse here, brown mare, sweet temper name of Biscuit. I am going to help you up if that is all right. Tell me if it is not all right." A long moment. Then a small motion of the hooded head. "Yes, And Micah helped her into the saddle, careful as if she were made of the good china, and she settled, and she did not tremble, and Amos watched all of it with his jaw working, and Silas mounted his big chestnut, and took the lead rope, and they rode up out of cold water into the white. The trail climbed, the air sharpened, the town fell away behind them and was swallowed, ridge by ridge, like a bad dream you cannot quite remember by noon. They rode a long time without speaking. The brothers talked once or twice in low voices about the snow and the passes and whether the creek had frozen solid enough to cross. They did not talk about her. Out of kindness mostly. Amos out of suspicion. Micah kept glancing back, checking she was still up, still steady, like a man minding a candle in the wind. And then an hour up, where the pines closed in dark on both sides, and there was nothing but white and quiet and the crunch of hooves, Silas said without turning around. "You can take it off." Marin did not answer. "No one is watching," he said. "Just us. And we have seen worse than any face." Still, she did not take it off. But after a while, where the trail narrowed and the footing turned to ice, she reached up with one hand and loosened the rope at her throat, and she lifted the bottom of the sack. Just enough to see the path in front of her horse. Not enough to show them anything. Her face stayed hidden. Micah saw the small movement, saw the careful, calculated inch of it, saw a woman who would let herself see, but would not yet let herself be seen, and he understood something then, before any of them, and he kept it to himself, because that, he thought, is not a woman who believes she is cursed. That is a woman who has learned very recently and very hard that being looked at is the most dangerous thing that can happen to her, which are not the same thing at all. By nightfall they reached the cabin. It stood against a black wall of pines near a frozen creek where the smoke from the chimney rose thin and straight into the still cold air. It was rough, but it was square and solid, built by hands that knew what they were doing, with a low barn beside it and a corral and a wood pile stacked high and neat against the worst of winter. And in the doorway, holding a lamp too big for her in a nightgown and one boot, was a girl of 6. She had wild dark hair that no brush had ever fully won against. She had a gap where a front tooth used to be. She had been told to stay inside and had clearly decided that order did not apply to her, and she stood in the spill of lamplight, squinting at the riders coming out of the dark. "Uncle Si," she called. "Uncle Si, did you bring the boots?" "I brought the boots," Nell Silas said, and something in his hard voice went soft for exactly 4 words, then closed again. "You brought a lady," Nell said. The brothers went still. Marin, on the brown mare, looked at the child through the gap in the sack, and the child looked at the sack, and the child was 6 and had not yet learned to be afraid of strange shapes. So she did the most natural thing in the world. She waved, and Marin, who had not been waved at in kindness in 3 weeks, who had been spat at and bid on and called cursed, felt the whole frozen morning crack open in her chest, and she had to grip the saddle horn so she would not make a sound. Do not cry in front of these people. You do not know them. The big one bought you, with gold at your feet, yes, but bought is bought, and you do not cry in front of a man who can buy you." The child waved. "So what? Children wave at dogs. Stop it. Stop. Breathe." They got her down off the horse. Micah did it careful again. Amos took the animals to the barn without a word, which was Amos, for I will believe she is safe when she proves it, and not 1 minute sooner. And Silas Calder opened the door of his own house and stood back and said, "Inside. It is warm." She went in. Now here is where the story turns and where the morning's promise comes due. So listen close. Inside the cabin was warm, a good fire, the smell of pine and wood smoke, and something stewed. But it was not what she expected. Not a filthy den, not a brute's cave. There were books, a whole shelf of them against the far wall, the spines worn soft from reading. There was a child's drawing pinned by the hearth. There was a rocking chair with a half-mended shirt across the arm. There was a row of pegs by the door, and a small pair of mittens hung on the lowest one at a child's height, and somebody had darned the thumb. It was a home. She had braced herself for a cell and walked into a home. And that was almost worse, because a cell she knew how to survive. Kindness she had no defenses left for. Silas closed the door, set the bar, took off his snow-heavy coat and hung it. And then he turned to her, and the room got very quiet, and the fire breathed low and red, and he said the thing he had not let himself say all day. "Take it off." Marin stood in the center of the room. The firelight moved on the rough burlap. Behind her, Micah went still by the bookshelf. By the hearth, little Nell watched with her lamp all eyes. For a long moment, Marin did not move. She had pictured this. Of course she had. The moment some man finally pulled the cover off and saw whatever it was he thought he had paid for. She had pictured his disgust, his anger at being cheated, the cursed business starting up all over again here, with the door barred in the dark, with nowhere to run and snow to the windows. "I will not scream," Silas said low, "and I will not send you back, whatever is under there. You have my word, and out here a man's word is the only thing he keeps clean." Her hands came up. They shook now, just a little. Now that it mattered most, they finally shook. She took hold of the burlap, and she pulled it up, and over, and off. Silas Calder expected burns. I had braced for it, the way you brace to lift something hot. He expected twisted flesh, a ruined mouth, an eye gone wrong, something that would explain the sack and the rope and the cruelty and the word everyone kept using. Instead, he gasped. He could not help it. The breath just left him. Because she was beautiful, not in the soft, powdered way of the women in the catalogs. Beautiful, the way the country was beautiful. Honey gold hair damp at the temples, falling loose past her shoulders, catching the firelight in 100 warm strands. A heart-shaped face, pale as cream, with a high color rising in her cheeks from the heat of the room. Blue eyes, cornflower blue, wide and clear and absolutely fiercely awake. And those eyes were not lowered. She lifted her chin and she looked straight at the giant who had bought her, and she dared him. With her whole battered, frightened, unbroken self, she dared him to flinch. The fire popped. Nell, by the hearth, said in the loud whisper of the young, "She is pretty, Uncle Si." Micah let out a breath he had been holding, and Amos, who had come in quiet from the barn and stood now in the door with snow on his shoulders, said nothing at all, but his hand came off his rifle. Marin held the silence as long as she could. Then she spoke, and her voice did not shake the way her hands had. It came out level, even, carved. "Well," she said, "do I look cursed?" Silas Calder looked at her for a long moment. He looked at the blue eyes that would not lower, at the high, proud chin, at the cream-pale face that no fire and no fear had managed to crack. And what he felt was not what she was braced for. It was rage. "Quiet," Cold. Total. Not at her. Never at her. At every single person who had stood in that frozen square and looked at this and called it cursed. No, he said. Just that. But the way he said it, like a verdict, like a door closing on the whole rotten town below them. Marin's eyes filled. She blinked it back hard, furious at herself, and won mostly. You are supposed to be afraid of me, she said. They paid good money to make you afraid of me. Silas called her. Looked at this woman standing straight in his home in a cheap dress with the firelight in her hair, and the corner of his hard mouth moved. Almost. Not a smile. The distant cousin of one. I have been afraid of exactly 3 things in my life, he said. None of them had your face. That night he gave her the loft. This, too, she had not expected. And the not expecting kept happening all night like a clock striking the wrong hours. There is a loft, he said, nodding at the ladder. Bed up there is good, warm with the fire below. You take it. I will sleep down here by the door. She stared at him. She had spent the ride bracing for what men think they buy. She had decided somewhere on that white trail that if it came to it, she would fight. And she had picked out in her mind the iron poker by the hearth, and she had made her peace with whatever happened after. And here he was, pointing at the highest, safest, warmest corner of the house, and handing it to her and putting his own big body down between her and the only door. Like a man does not when he means harm, but when he means to be a wall against it. You are not afraid, she said. And now you are not. The other thing, I told you, Silas said, already unrolling a blanket on the floorboards. I do not believe in curses, and I do not touch what is not freely given. Not ever. You are safe here, Miss Hartwell, safer than you have been in a long while, and you can spend the night up there figuring out whether to believe me, because I do not expect you to take it on faith from a stranger who showed up with gold. She climbed the ladder. She did not sleep, not for a long time. She lay in the warm and the dark and listened to the cabin breathe. The fire. The child turning over. The big man below awake, too, she could tell, lying still and silent and guarding a door against a world that had never once guarded her. And against her ribs under her dress where she kept it, always was a small, flat, hard thing. A book. Her father's book. Worn green cloth. The corners soft as moth wings from his hands, and now from hers. A volume of poems he had taught from, in a schoolhouse in Ohio, a lifetime and 1,000 miles ago. The only thing she had carried out of the wreck of her life. The thing they had not found when they took her purse and her trunk and her name. She held it against her chest in the dark, and she did not cry. She had decided 3 weeks ago that she was done crying where anyone could hear. In the morning, she came down the ladder before the men were up, and she found Micah already at the table with a cup of coffee, and the gray light at the window, and a book open in front of him, and he startled when she appeared like a deer, surprised at a stream. You read, she said. It was not a question. She had seen the shelf. Some, Micah said. Slow. We are short on schools up here. Long on winter. She looked at the open page. Cooper, she said. The last of the Mohicans. Micah's whole face changed. You know it. I taught it, Marin said, and the words came out before she could stop them, before she remembered. She was nobody now, before she remembered the rules of being cursed. I taught school. 2 years. Before. Before what? Said a low voice. Silas was up. standing by the hearth, lacing a boot, watching her with those whisky eyes that gave away nothing and missed nothing. Marin went quiet. The before was the whole story, and the whole story was a noose, and she had learned not to put her head in it. But the cabin was warm, and the child was sleeping, and the man had slept across her door all night and never once tried the ladder. And something in her, some starved and stubborn thing, was so tired of holding it all alone. So she set down her father's book on the table where they could see it but not touch it. And she told them a piece of the truth. "I came west to be married," she said. "I answered an advertisement. A man, a rancher," the paper said, in the territory, "wanting a wife. My father had died and the house was gone, and there was nothing left for me back east but other people's pity, and I would rather face a stranger in Wyoming than a lifetime of that. So I sold what I could, and I bought a train ticket, and I came." She stopped. Her jaw tightened. "There was no rancher," she said. Micah set down his coffee. "There was a man at the station," she said, "polite, well-dressed. He said the rancher had been delayed, that he would take me to lodging in the meantime, that he would mind my trunk and my money for safekeeping on the rough roads. And I was tired, and I was alone, and I had no one. So I let him. And then I never saw my trunk again, or my money, or any rancher. And when I asked questions, when I would not stop asking questions, the polite man told a great many people that I was not right in the head, that I was a hysteric, a liar, and that misfortune followed me, that my own father had died because of me. He said it so often and so kindly, and he was so respectable, and I was so strange and so penniless, that the whole town believed him over me inside a week." She looked at the fire. "And then there was a debt," she said. "One I never made. For lodging and passage I never asked for, and when I could not pay a debt I did not owe, they put me on a wagon, and they put a sack on my head so the buyers would not be troubled by my cursed face. And you know the rest." The cabin was very quiet. Nell had woken and crept halfway down the ladder, and sat there on a rung, listening the way children listen with their whole bodies. Amos came in from the barn, stamping snow, and stopped and read the silence, and held it. Silas called, had not moved through the whole telling, but his face had changed by degrees, the way a sky changes before weather, and his big hands had gone slow and still at the bootlace. "This man," he said at last, "the polite one, at the station, he have a name." And Marin looked up at him, and for the first time she let them see the fear that lived under the proud chin. The real fear, the bottom of it, and she said, "I am not going to say it." "Why not?" "Because," she said, "every time I say it, something gets worse. The last time I said it out loud to a sheriff, the rope on my wrists got shorter, and the wagon came the next morning. He is powerful, he is liked, he is believed, and I am a cursed woman who came in on a train with no people. So I have learned to keep his name behind my teeth, Mr. Calder, where it cannot cost me anything more than it already has." She picked her father's book back up off the table and held it against her chest, the way she had held it all night. "But I will tell you the one thing I cannot stop saying," she said, "the one thing I do not care who hears." She looked at each of them. "My father did not drink himself off that mountain road," she said. That is what they wrote. "Drunk, lost the road in the dark, an accident, tragic, case closed." Her voice was steady and it was terrible. "My father never touched a drop of liquor in his life, not one. He buried his own father over the bottle, and he swore off it before I was born, and he kept that oath for 15 years that I watched with my own eyes. He went up a road he had ridden 100 times. sober, in good weather, that turned bad after, and he never came down. She held the green book tighter. So you can believe what you like about the curse, she said, but somebody killed my father and called it whiskey. And the only thing keeping me alive, I think, is that they have not yet found whatever it is they are so afraid he left behind. Nobody said anything. The fire cracked, and little Nell on the ladder rung said into the silence, in the simple, total way of the very young, "You can stay here. We will not let anybody put a sack on you again." And that was that. No one argued, not even Amos. The child had said it so the men did not have to, and a child saying it made it true. In a way, three grown and guarded people never could have managed on their own. Marin Hartwell put her hand to her mouth and turned to the window so they would not see, and outside, the snow had stopped and the morning was bright and thawed and clean. The days that followed were quiet. The good kind of quiet she had forgotten existed. She worked. Without being asked, without being told the way a person works, when work is the one thing that has never betrayed them. She cooked, and the brothers ate like men who had not had a proper meal in a year, which they had not. She mended the half-finished shirt and three more besides. She swept and scrubbed and set the rough cabin to rights, and she did it with a competence that surprised them, hands that knew a needle and a kettle and a ledger alike. She taught Nell her letters at the table by the fire. A is for antelope, B is for biscuit, the brown mare, and the child glowed under it like a plant turned to the sun. And Silas Calder watched from the doorway with an expression no one could read. She and Micah traded books and traded arguments about them. Cooper and Scott and the worn green volume of poems she let him hold, now just for an hour, watching his hands the whole time. And slowly, slowly the cabin warmed in a way that had nothing to do with the fire. Amos thawed last. He watched her for 4 days the way you watch a stranger's dog. And on the 5th day she handed him a cup of coffee, made exactly the way he took it, black and bitter and scalding, without his ever having said, and he looked at the cup, and he looked at her, and he grunted, "You pay attention." "I had to learn too," she said. "It used to be how I stayed safe, knowing what people wanted before they knew it themselves." "And out here," Amos said. "And out here," she said, "I am only just learning it can be how you take care of people instead." Amos drank his coffee. He did not say anything else, but the next time he came in from the barn, he stamped his snow off, careful at the door, so as not to track the floor she had scrubbed, and for Amos Calder, that was the same as a hymn. It was the 6th evening when it changed. The light was going, blue and cold over the snow. Silas had gone out to bring in an armload of wood before dark, and Marin stood at the window watching the day die over the peaks, feeling something she did not have a name for and was afraid to name in case naming it broke it. Safe. She felt safe. 6 days. Don't trust it. 6 days is nothing. 6 days is how long the town in the valley took to turn on you, remember? You counted 6 days from polite to a sack. Don't you dare get comfortable. Don't you dare let your guard. Watch the door. Always watch the Sluss did not come back in. A minute passed. 2. The armload of wood was an easy thing. 2 minutes at most. She knew the rhythms of the cabin, now knew its sounds, and the sound that was wrong was the silence where the door should have opened. She went to the window. He was standing at the edge of the woodpile, the logs forgotten at his feet, and he was not looking at the woodpile. He was crouched, looking at the snow, at the ground near the corral where the fresh white was the cleanest where any mark would show. Marin's stomach went cold, and it had nothing to do with winter. She opened the door. The freezing air poured in. Amos was on his feet at once, reading her face, and Micah pulled Nell back from the hearth without being told, his arm around the child, his eyes gone hard and old in his young face. Silas straightened slowly. He walked back toward the cabin, and his boots were careful, and his voice, when it came, was the same low, even voice from the auction square, the voice that did not need to shout. "Tracks," he said. Marin's hand found the door frame. "Fresh," Silas said. "Since the snow stopped this morning. Horses. 3 of them. Heavy, well fed, not tired. They came up close in the night, circled the cabin, walked the corral, counted the windows." He stopped in front of her, and the last gray light was on his face, and the rage was back in it, quiet and total. "And then they turned around," he said, "and rode back down toward the valley. Slow, in no hurry at all, the way men ride when they have seen everything they came to see, and they are going home to tell someone what they found." Nobody breathed. "Pack what you need," Silas said. "Tonight, just in case." Marin looked up at the giant who had bought her off a block 6 days ago, and slept across her door every night since, and she heard her own voice come out small and certain in the cold. "He found me." And Silas Calder looked down at the woman with the proud chin and the dead father and the secret name she would not say. And he did not lie to her, because she had been lied to enough to last 3 lifetimes. "Not yet," he said, "but he is close. And whoever he is, the man you will not name, he wants you bad enough to send 3 riders up a mountain in winter just to count my windows." He picked up the fallen wood. He looked at the dark tree line below them, where the tracks led where the valley waited with its smiling, gloved, respectable man, and his closed folder full of paper. "And the only question left," he said, "half to her and half to the dark, is what a powerful man down in that town is so afraid, you know." The fire burned low behind them. Winter had only just begun. The riders came back on the 9th night, and they did not bother to hide it this time. Marin heard them first. She had trained herself, too. 3 weeks of sleeping with one ear open does that to a person, carves a new kind of listening into you. And she was awake in the loft with her father's book against her ribs when the sound came up the mountain out of the dark. Hoofbeats, more than 3, slow and deliberate on the frozen ground, and then a voice calling up through the pines, friendly as a Sunday picnic, which was the worst part, because she knew that friendliness she had been ruined by that exact friendliness once already. "Hello, the cabin." She was down the ladder before she decided to move. Silas was already up. Of course he was. He slept the way mountain men sleep in winter, which is barely, and he was at the window with the rifle in his hands, and Nell already pushed behind him, and Amos was at the second window, and Micah had his back to the bookshelf with the child's small shape tucked against his legs. They had a drill, she realized. They had done this before. Just not for her. "Stay low," Silas said. "Away from the glass." Marin did not stay low. She crossed to the 3rd window, and she looked out because she had to see. Because not seeing was the thing that had nearly killed her. And there in the blue snowlight at the edge of the trees sat 4 riders. 3 she did not know. Hard men, hired faces, rifles across their saddles. Easy, like they expected to use them, and were in no rush about it. And one she did. Hollis Dern, the auctioneer, the knife smile. He sat his horse out front like a man come to collect a library book, and he tipped his hat at the dark cabin as if he could see her standing at the window. And maybe he could. "Evening," he called. "Calder, is it? The big one with the gold. I am here on a small matter of business." "There is no business with you," Silas said through the door. "Not at this hour. Not at any hour. Ride down." "Now that is not neighborly," Dern said. "See, you bought goods at auction. Fair and square, I will grant you. Except there has been a question raised about the title." "The what?" "Amos," said Lowe, just to his brother. "The lie they are going to use." Marin whispered back, and the men looked at her, and she did not take her eyes off Dern. "Watch. Here it comes. He is going to make me a thing again. A thing with a title. A thing that can be repossessed. Turns out," Dern called pleasantly, "the woman came west under a marriage contract. Signed. Legal. Witnessed. And a contracted bride is not a thing a man can just buy off a wagon and keep, no matter how much gold he throws around. That is near enough to theft the way a judge would see it. So I am here to take her back to the party she is promised to. All very lawful. No need for any of this." Marin's whole body went cold, because it was the perfect lie. Because in 1884, a woman was not quite a person in the eyes of the law, not all the way, and a marriage contract was a leash. A man could yank from 100 miles off, and she had no paper to fight it, no people, no name, worth anything, and a respectable man's signed contract against a cursed woman's word was not a contest. It was a foregone conclusion. She felt the old trap closing, the familiar shape of it, smiling, legal, inescapable. And then Silas Calder spoke, and his voice did not rise, and somehow that made it land like a dropped anvil. "Show me the contract," he said. Silence from the trees. "You said—" "Signed," Silas said. "Witnessed. Legal. So you brought it. A man does not ride up a mountain in the dark to repossess a bride and forget the one piece of paper that lets him do it. Hold it up. Let me see her name on it in the lamplight, and the name of the man she is promised to, and the witness, and the date." Dern's horse shifted. "I do not carry originals into the cold," Dern said, and the friendliness had a crack in it now. A hairline crack, but Marin heard it, and her heart did something strange in her chest. "I is lying. There is no contract. There cannot be a contract because I never signed one, because there was never a rancher, because it was all bait. He is bluffing. He came up here to scare us into handing me over before anyone thought to ask for paper. And the big one asked for paper." "No paper," Silas said. "Then no title. Then no business. Then ride down Dern and tell the man who sent you that the next time he wants something off this mountain, he can come and ask for it himself, instead of sending a wagon salesman to do it in the dark." The crack in Dern's friendliness opened all the way. "You do not know what you have got yourself into. Mountain man," he said, and the picnic was gone from his voice entirely, now replaced by something flat and ugly. "You think this is about one woman. You have no idea. You have stuck your big arm into a machine that has been running a long time and grinding up better men than you, and it does not stop. It does not get tired. It just keeps turning. You hand her over now while you still can, or that machine turns on you and that little girl and your brothers and everything you have built up here in your nice quiet snow." And there it was, the threat against the child. Marin saw it happen, saw the exact instant the words left Dern's mouth and reached Silas Calder, and saw something close behind the big man's eyes, a door, a shutter, a thing slamming down hard. "Because you do not threaten a man's child. Not ever. Not on this mountain." There are rules out here, older than any law a town can write, and the first of them is that a child is sacred, and the second is that the man who forgets the first does not get a third. Silas opened the door. Just enough to let the rifle barrel rest on the frame level. Steady pointed at the friendly man on the horse, and the snow light caught the long blue line of it. "You have got until I count to 3. Silas said to be off my land." 1. Dern's hand drifted toward his own rifle. 2. And Amos Calder stepped into the second window, with his rifle up and a grin that had no humor in it at all. And from the loft, though no one had seen her climb back up, came the small hard click of a third weapon, because Marin had found the spare, and she had remembered how, and she had it braced on the sill and pointed at the trees, and she was not shaking. Dern looked at one rifle, then 2, then at the loft 3. And he was a coward in the end. The way men who sell women are almost always cowards underneath the smile. And 3 guns was 2 more than he had planned on, and he had not been paid enough to bleed in the snow tonight. He backed his horse. "This is not over," Dern said, which is what they always say. The small men when a thing is very much not going their way and they need a sentence to leave on. "It is for tonight," Silas said. 3. And he did not fire, but the way he said 3 made the choice very clear, and Hollis Dern wheeled his horse and his 3 hired guns wheeled theirs, and they rode back down into the dark, slow at first, with as much dignity as a routed man can manage, and then faster until the hoofbeats faded, and there was only the wind and the pounding of 5 hearts in a small warm room. Marin came down the ladder, slowly, the rifle still in her hands, and Silas crossed to her, and he did not take it away. He just put his big hand under the barrel and gently lowered it toward the floor, the way you ease down something that has done its work. "You did good," he said. The same words. She looked at him, and the fear caught up with her all at once, the way it does after when the danger is gone, and the body finally lets itself understand what almost happened, and her eyes filled, and this time she did not have the strength to win against it. "He will not stop," she said. "You heard him. The machine, it does not stop." Silas looked at the door he had just barred, at the dark beyond it, at the woman in front of him with the wet eyes and the proud chin that would not go down even now. "Then neither will we," he said. "So now you understand the trap they mean to use. Not a gun. A piece of paper that does not exist in a country where a woman's word weighs nothing against a rich man's lie. And you understand that the big quiet man has chosen fully and finally to stand between her and all of it. But you do not yet know why. You do not yet know what the Calder brothers lost to this same machine years ago in this same snow. Stay close, because that is the next thing to come out of the dark." The marshal came 4 days later, and he came alone, and he came in daylight, and that was somehow more frightening than the riders had been. Marin saw him from the corral where she was learning to muck a stall from Amos, who taught the way he did everything by doing it and grunting when she got it wrong. A single rider coming up the trail at a walk, no hurry, no hiding. A federal star on his coat catching the thin sun. Amos saw him at the same moment, and went still as a held breath. "Inside," he said. Now, she did not go inside. She set down the pitchfork, and she stood very straight by the corral rail, and she watched the law ride up to take her, because she had decided something in the 9 days she had been here, decided it without quite noticing, and the something was this. She was done being handed over, done being a parcel. If the law had come for her, she would meet it on her feet with her chin up, and they could drag her down, but they would have to drag. The marshal reined in at the edge of the yard. He was older, 50 near enough, weathered the way the land weathered men, with a gray mustache and eyes that had seen a great deal and judged most of it. He sat his horse and he looked at the cabin and the woman by the rail and the big man who had come out the door with a rifle held down but ready, and the second brother, already at the corner of the barn, and he took the whole picture in, slowly. Then he raised one empty hand, open, palm out. "Marshal Nathaniel Holt," he said. "United States Marshal this territory. I have got no warrant and I have got no quarrel. I would like to come down off this horse and talk, if a man can do that here without getting shot, and I would surely like a cup of whatever is making that smoke smell so good." Nobody moved. "I can sit out here in the cold and yell," Holt said mildly. "Or we can be civilized, your choice. But I have been in the saddle since before light tracking a thing that finally has a face, and my backside has opinions about it, and against every instinct she owned." Marin believed him. Not all the way. She had believed a friendly man at a train station once, and it had cost her everything. But there was something different in this one. A tiredness. An honesty worn into him like the gray in his mustache. He did not smile the knife smile. He did not smile much at all. "Let him in," she heard herself say. The men looked at her. "If he wanted me in irons, he would have brought 10 men in a wagon," she said. "He came alone in daylight with his hand open. That is not how they take a cursed woman. I have seen how they take a cursed woman. This is something else." Silas looked at her for a long moment. Then he stepped back from the door. "Coffee is on," he said to the marshal. "Mind the dog. We do not have a dog, but mind it anyway." And for the first time, the ghost of something crossed Marshal Holt's weathered face, something that might once long ago have been a sense of humor, and he climbed down off his horse with a groan and came in out of the cold. They sat him at the table. Marin poured. Her hands were steady, she made sure of it, and she set the cup in front of him and stepped back to the hearth where Nell was, and she put her hand on the child's shoulder, without thinking about it, and Holt watched that too, watched everything, the way the big man did, and she understood these were the same breed under the skin, the watchful kind, the kind that missed nothing. "You are the Hartwell woman," Holt said. "The school teacher's daughter, came in on the spring train, got herself into a deal of trouble down in cold water." "I did not get myself into anything," Marin said. "It was done to me." Holt nodded slowly, like that was an answer he had heard before and mostly believed. "I will tell you why I am here," he said, and he wrapped both old hands around the warm cup. 3 months back, I started getting reports. Not from cold water, from all over, Cheyenne, up toward the Montana line, down south near the Colorado border. Women coming west to marry, answering advertisements, bringing what little they had, a bit of money, a deed to a parcel back home, an inheritance, a claim. And then he stopped. "And then nothing," he said. "They arrive and they are met and they are taken to lodging by a respectable man, and then they are not anywhere anymore. Some turn up ruined and run out of town like you branded mad or loose or cursed, and they will not say a word about who did it because they are too frightened or too shamed. And some—" He turned the cup in his hands. "Some do not turn up at all," he said. The cabin went very quiet. Marin felt the floor tilt under her, because she had thought she was one woman. One unlucky hunted woman. She had carried it as her own private nightmare, her own personal curse, and she had never once let herself imagine that the smiling man at the station did this. Again and again, like a season, like a crop. How many, she said. Her voice came out wrong. I do not know, Holt said. That is the truth of it. Enough that I stopped thinking it was bad luck. Enough that I started thinking it was a business. The same shape every time. A man who looks like money. A marriage that turns into a robbery. A woman discredited so thorough that even when she screams, nobody hears her because he has made sure the whole town thinks she is crazy before she opens her mouth. He looked up at Marin. Sound familiar, he said. She could not speak. She nodded. Once. There you are, then. Holt said almost gently. You are the first one I have found who is still here, still in the territory, still got her wits plainly, and her tongue. Every other woman I have tracked is either gone or so broke down with fear, she would sooner die than name him. So I am going to ask you the question I came all this way to ask Miss Hartwell, and I am going to ask it once. He set down the cup. Who is he? And the whole cabin held its breath. Marin stood by the fire, with her hand on the child's shoulder, and the green book heavy against her ribs, and she felt the name rise in her throat, the name she had kept behind her teeth for 3 weeks because every time she let it out, the rope got shorter. Don't. He is law. So what? The last one was a sheriff, and the sheriff was bought. How do you know this one is not bought? You do not. You do not know anything. You believed a man with an open hand once before. Except he rode up alone. Except he asked instead of grabbing. Except there are other women. Other women. You are not the curse. You were never the curse. There are others, and they are gone. And if you do not say it now, he wins forever, and you stay cursed forever. And somewhere right now there is a girl on a train coming west to the exact same. Edmund Crane. She said it. She said it out loud in the daylight to a man with a star for the first time, and her voice cracked clean down the middle on the second word, and the saying of it was like pulling a knife out of her own side, terrible, and a relief all at once. Edmund Crane, she said again, steadier. He owns half the land in the valley below Coldwater. He sits in the front row at the auctions in a good coat with soft gloves, and he holds a folder of papers he never lets go of. He is liked. He is trusted. He gives money to the church. And he took my trunk and my money and my name, and when I would not stop asking for them back, he told the whole world I was mad and cursed, and that I killed my own father by being born unlucky. The cup stopped halfway to Marshal Holt's mouth, and he set it down very slowly, and Marin saw with a lurch that the name meant something to him. That she had handed him a piece he had been missing, and it had clicked into a place he already had carved, and waiting. Crane Holt said softly. He breathed it, like a man confirming a thing he had hoped he was wrong about. You know him, Marin said. I know the name. Holt said, and he did not look at her now. He looked at the middle distance, at something only he could see. Crane in Coldwater. There was a Mallory up by the Montana line 2 years back, same business, same shape gone before I could lay a hand on him. And a vein down near the Colorado border before that. Different names, same gloves, same folder, same trail of ruined women and quiet graves. He looked up. I have been chasing one man under 3 names across 3 corners of this territory for 2 years, Holt said, and you, Miss Hartwell, are the first living soul who has put a face to him and lived in the same county long enough to say so. And that was the second great turn of it. Because in one breath, The curse became a manhunt, and the lonely hunted woman became the only witness in the territory who could put a rope around the neck of a man who had been slipping nooses for years. Remember the three names: Crane, Mallory, Vane. One of them is his real one, and the day Marin learns which is the day everything ends. Marshal Holt stayed the night because the light was going, and the trail was bad, and over the supper Marin cooked the thing she had not expected happened, the thing that broke the cabin open from the inside. She learned why Silas Calder had stood in that square and torn loose something he had nailed shut. It came out slow. It came out because Holt, turning his cup, said almost to himself that the cruelest part was the children, the ones left behind when a defrauded woman died, or ran the little ones who ended up on church steps and in poorhouses because a smiling man wanted a parcel of land. And Micah went still. And Amos got up from the table and went to the window and stood with his back to all of them. And Nell, who had been falling asleep against Marin's side, didn't stir. And Silas Calder, who had said maybe 40 words in 9 days, set down his fork and looked at his own scarred hands on the table and said into the quiet, "We had a sister." Marin did not move. "Eve," he said, "youngest of us by 4 years. The bright one, the one who was going to get off this mountain and make something. She went down to Cheyenne to keep house for a family, and she met a man there. Polite, well-dressed, money, or so it looked, and he married her, and she wrote us letters so happy we hardly knew her hand." His thumb moved over an old scar on his knuckle. "Slow. And then the letters stopped," he said. "And when I rode down to Cheyenne to find out why there was no husband and no money and no house, and my sister was in a back room with a baby 3 weeks old and a fever, and everyone in that town would tell you she was a fallen woman who had made up a husband to cover her shame. Everyone. Because he had told them so. Because he had married her quiet and robbed her quiet and gone and left her holding a child and a story nobody would believe." The fire popped. "She had a name for him," Silas said. "Eve did. She said it to me, with the last clear breath she had. And I rode all over that country, looking for a man by that name. And I never found him, because by then he was someone else, somewhere else, smiling at some other girl at some other station." He looked up, and his whiskey eyes were dry, which was worse than wet, much worse, the dryness of a grief gone so deep it has run out of water. "Eve did not last the week," he said. "We brought the baby home. Nell. We have raised her up here, the 3 of us, 6 years, the best we knew how, which is not very good, because what do 3 men know about a little girl? But we have kept her safe. That much we could do, keep one child safe up a mountain where the smiling men do not come." And then he said, "I rode down for flour, and there was a woman on a wagon with a sack over her head and a smiling man selling her with the exact same words they used on my sister." He looked at Marin, and the whole 9 days made sudden and total sense. The gold at her feet, and the loft, and the rifle gently lowered, and every careful, guarded, gentle thing. "I could not save Eve," Silas Calder said simply. "I was too far and too late, and I did not know the shape of it then. I know the shape of it now. So I am not going to be too late twice. That is all. That is the whole of why." Marin sat very still with the sleeping child against her side, and the fire warm on her face, and she understood that she had stumbled, half dead, into the one cabin, in the whole territory, where her curse was not a curse, but a wound these men already carried, and that the man across the table had not bought a bride at all. He had bought a second chance at a thing that had broken him, and little Nell. The baby. Eve had died holding slept on against the side of a woman. The same machine had tried to grind up and did not know that the two halves of the same long sorrow had just been laid side by side at a supper table in the snow. Maren reached over slow, and she put her hand over Silas Calder's big scarred one on the table. She did not say anything. There was nothing to say that would not have been smaller than the silence. He looked at her hand on his. I did not pull away. And across the room at the window, Amos Calder watched his brother not pull away, and something in the hard line of his shoulders eased just slightly, the way ice eases the first warm day, long before the thaw is anything you can see. So that is the wound. Now you know it. The smiling man did not only take Maren's life. He took their Eve and left them a motherless child, and a grief with no grave to put it in. Which means this was never going to be a rescue. It was always going to be a reckoning. But a reckoning needs proof, and the proof, though none of them know it yet, has been sitting on the supper table this whole time in a worn green book against a dead man's daughter's heart. Keep listening. Marshal Holt rode out the next morning, but he did not ride far. Your word alone will not hang a man like Crane, he told Maren at the door with his horse saddled and the cold coming off the peaks. Not a respectable man with a church pew and a county that loves him. I have learned that the hard way twice. I need proof a judge cannot wave aside. Paper, something in the man's own hand. And until I have it, my hands are tied tighter than yours ever were. He pulled his hat down against the wind. So I will keep close, he said. There is a way station down the North Fork, an hour's hard ride from here, run by a family named Pruitt. I will be at it or near it through the thaw. If Crane sends so much as one rider up this mountain, you send one down to me. Day or night, snow or no snow, I will come. He looked at her a moment longer, the gray eyes steady. You held out a long time alone, Miss Hartwell, he said. You do not have to anymore. That is the only thing I came up here to say that matters. And then he rode down into the white, and Maren stood in the doorway and watched the law go. And for the first time in 3 weeks, the law going did not feel like a door closing. It felt like a door propped open, just a crack against the dark. The weeks turned, and the snow deepened, and the cabin became a thing it had not been in 6 years. A family, not in name. Nothing was said. The Calder brothers were not men who said things, but it grew anyway, the way the most real things grow without announcement in the doing. Maren taught Nell to read by the fire, and the child went from her letters to small words to whole sentences, and the first sentence she ever read aloud, all by herself, was from the Green Book, a line of poetry halting and proud, and Silas Calder had to go out to the woodpile after, and he was gone a while, and no one said anything about that either. She and Micah read together in the evenings and argued about everything, and his slow, careful reading got less slow. And one night she realized she had not just been a school teacher's daughter. Playing at it, she had been a teacher again, a real one, the first real thing she had been since her father died, and the realizing made her cry in the loft, but the good kind this time, the kind that washes instead of drowns. Amos taught her the country, the tracks of things, the weather signs, how to read a sky and a trail and a far ridge, how to load fast and aim true until the day came when she put 3 shots into a knot on a far pine in a row, and Amos lowered his own rifle and looked at the grouping and said, "You will do," which from Amos was the same as a man weeping and embracing her, and she knew it, and she grinned at him, and he almost grinned back almost. And Silas. With Silas, it was slower, and it was quieter, and it went deeper. It was 1,000 small things. The way he started leaving the best of the meat on her plate without a word and getting gruff if she tried to move it back. The way she learned the meaning of his silences, which one was tired, and which one was angry, and which one, the rarest one, was content. The way they would end up on the porch at the end of the day, not talking, watching the dark come down over the peaks close enough that the cold did not reach the side of her that was near him. The way he carved her, a small thing one night by the fire, and set it on the table by her hand, and went to bed without a word, and it was a sparrow, a little wooden sparrow, rough and plain and somehow exactly right, and when she asked him in the morning why a sparrow, he would not look at her, and he said, "Lo, smallest bird there is. Everybody overlooks it. Town probably called you a sparrow and meant it mean. I figure they never watched one fly." And Marin had to put the sparrow down and hold the edge of the table, because no one had ever, in her whole life, said a thing like that to her. And the man who said it had then immediately pretended to be very interested in his coffee, and that somehow made it worse or better. She could not tell. She could not tell anything anymore where Silas Calder was concerned, and that frightened her more than any rider in the snow. "Stop it, stop. You cannot. You came here sold. You cannot let it turn into what? Into whatever this is, because the last time you trusted a quiet kindness, No, no, this is not that, and you know it, and that is exactly the problem. Because if this is real, then you have something to lose again. You swore you never would. You swore in that cell you would never again have one single thing they could take. And here you are with a wooden sparrow, and a child who reads to you, and a man who leaves you the best of the meat. You are building a thing they can burn. Stop building it. You cannot stop building it. Oh, you foolish woman, you have already built it." There was an evening deep in that long, warm stretch, when it almost came undone in the open. A jar slipped from her hands at the wash basin and shattered, and she went down on her knees to gather the pieces too fast, and Silas knelt at the same moment to help, and their hands met over the broken glass, and neither one let go. Just that. A hand over a hand on a cold floor. And Marin felt her whole guarded heart lurch up against the inside of her ribs, like something trying to get out, and she lifted her eyes, and Silas was right there, closer than he had ever let himself be. The firelight in the whiskey of his eyes, and for one long suspended breath, the whole cabin seemed to hold still around the two of them. Her heart went so fast it frightened her. Because this was the thing. This was the cliff, and she had sworn in a cold cell that she would never again stand at the edge of wanting something this much, because want was how they got you. Wanting was the soft place where the knife went in, and yet, his hand was warm and it was not gripping. It was only there, the way the whole man was only there, a wall and not a cage, and some starved thing in her wanted to lean the last inch and find out what it was to be held by someone who had put the money at her feet instead of in the seller's hand. Then Nell called out sleepily from the loft for a drink of water, and the moment let go of them gentle, the way a held breath lets go. Silas stood. He cleared his throat. He went and got the child her water, and Marin stayed kneeling on the floor with the broken glass and her racing heart, and she thought very clearly in the quiet of her own head, oh no, it is already too late. It was too late the night he gave me the loft. You foolish, foolish woman. You have gone and let yourself be glad you are alive. It was deep winter when the mystery cracked open, and it cracked because of the child, the way these things so often turn on the smallest hands. Nell had the green book. She had earned it in her own mind. She could read now after all, and the book was the best reader in the house, and Maren had let her hold it more and more. And on this particular gray afternoon, the child was curled by the fire, with it sounding out the hard words when she got frustrated, with a page that would not lie flat. The back cover, the board of it. The cloth had lifted at one corner, the old glue gone with age and damp, and it would not stay shut, and it kept springing up under Nell's small fingers, and she picked at it the way children pick at a thing that annoys them. And it came away, just the lining, the marbled paper pasted inside the backboard, peeling up under a 6-year-old's fidget. And there was something behind it. Maren, Nell said. Maren, there is a paper in the book. And Maren turned from the stove and saw the lifted lining, and saw the edge of something folded and yellow tucked into the hollow of the board, and the spoon fell out of her hand and rang on the floor. She crossed the room. She knelt by the child. Her hands were not steady now, not at all. She drew it out. 2 things. A folded sheet of paper, close written in a hand she would have known in her grave, her father's hand, small and neat and careful, the hand that had taught 1,000 children their letters. And tucked inside the fold, a second thing stiffer, a page torn from a ledger, columns, figures, names, dates. She did not understand the ledger page. Not yet. The figures meant nothing to her, the names were strangers. But the letter was to her. My dear Maren, it began, and she had to stop and breathe and start again. My dear Maren, if you are reading this, it is because I am gone, and I am afraid I know how, and I am sorry, my girl, more sorry than this small space can hold. The cat had gone silent around her. The men had come close, all 3 drawn by the fallen spoon, and the look on her face, and they stood and they did not speak, and they let her read. I have learned a thing I was not meant to learn, the letter said. A man in this country is stealing land from the dead and the helpless women, mostly with forged papers and false marriages. And he does it under a face so respectable, no one will hear a word against him. I learned it because he came to me. He needed a thing only a man in my position could give. A witness's hand. A schoolmaster's seal on a survey to make a stolen parcel look bought and legal. He offered me money. When I refused him, he offered me threats. And I have seen since the way he looks at our house and at you. And I do not think a refusing man lives long in his country. Maren's voice had stopped working. Micah gently took the page from her shaking fingers and read the rest aloud, low and steady, because someone had to, and she could not. So I have done the only thing I can. The letter went on in Micah's quiet voice. I have kept proof, a page from his own books that I took the night he showed them to me, thinking I was already bought. It names his frauds and the men who help him, and one thing more, the thing he would kill 100 men to keep buried. His true name. Not the name he wears in this town. His real one, the one with a price on it in 3 states, written in his own ledger in his own hand. Micah stopped. He looked up, then back down, and finished it. I have hidden this where only love would think to look, the letter said. In the book I read you to sleep with. If you have found it, my brave girl, then trust no one who is too kind, too fast. Tell no one until you find a lawman who cannot be bought, and know that your old father, who never in his life touched the drink, they will surely say killed him, loved you past the edge of his own last day. Be brave. Be free, and do not let them tell you that you are anything other than the finest thing I ever made. The fire cracked. No one breathed, and Maren Hartwell knelt on the floor of the cabin, with her father's last words in her hands, and his proof against her heart. And she understood all at once, and all the way down, three things that changed the shape of the whole world. She understood that she had been carrying the one weapon that could destroy Edmund Crane for 3 weeks across 100 miles of his own country, tucked against her ribs through the auction and the sack and the row, and he had been hunting her the whole time precisely because he feared she had it. She understood why the riders kept coming, why a powerful man would send guns up a mountain in winter, not for a cursed woman, for the folded yellow page that held his real name. And she understood, looking up at the three brothers standing over her in the firelight, that the proof was only half the battle, because a ledger page is just paper, and paper needs a living voice to swear to it in front of a judge, and every other woman who could have was gone or too afraid, and she was the last one, the only one, the single living soul who could take her father's proof and her own true story and put them together in front of Marshal Holt and bring the whole machine grinding to a stop. She got to her feet, slowly, the letter in one hand, the ledger page in the other, the wooden sparrow on the table behind her catching the firelight, and the proud chin that the whole valley had tried to break came up all the way up, and her cornflower eyes were wet and they were burning, and they were not for 1 second the eyes of a cursed woman. "I know how to stop him," she said. Her voice was very quiet. It did not need to be loud. "I have known how the whole time," she said. "I just did not know I knew." Silas called her, looked at the woman standing in the firelight with her dead father's justice in her 2 hands and whatever had been growing in him. These long weeks finished growing all at once, and he did not say it because he was not a man who said things, but it was written so plain across his hard face that Amos saw it, and Micah saw it, and even Nell saw it and smiled. "Then we do not run," Silas said, "and we do not hide." He looked at the dark window, at the valley far below where a smiling man in soft gloves sat with a folder. He thought held all the cards. "We send for Holt," he said, "at first light, and we end it." Outside, the wind came down off the high peaks and pushed against the cabin walls and held, and the Beban held against it, the way it had all winter, the way it would. And somewhere, down in the valley though, none of them could know it yet, Edmund Crane was buttoning his good coat and pulling on his soft gloves because a man had ridden up to tell him that the school teacher's daughter was not broken and not gone and not alone and was living up a mountain with 3 armed brothers and a United States Marshal who would not stop circling. And for the first time in 2 years in 3 states under 3 names, the smiling man was not smiling. The reckoning was coming. And this time it would be coming down the mountain to find him. They did not get to choose the day. Crane chose it for them the way he chose everything, while other people thought the choosing was theirs. It came in the black hour before dawn, the hour when the fire is lowest and the body is heaviest and a person sleeps the way the dead sleep, and it came with the one weapon a mountain cannot bar its door against: fire. Marin woke to the smell of it, then to the light of it, orange and wrong, flickering on the loft ceiling, where no light should be at that hour. Then to Amos, shouting from below one word, the worst word a wooden house in winter can hear: barn. She was down the ladder before she was fully awake. The men were already moving, already in their boots, and the window showed her the thing her mind did not want to take. The barn roof was a sheet of flame against the black, and the animals were screaming inside it, and the snow all around was lit up gold and dancing, and at the edge of the trees, sitting their horses watching it burn, were men. Many men, more than 4 this time. A dozen near enough dark shapes against the firelight, and they were not rushing in. And that was the horror of it. They were just sitting there waiting because the fire was not meant to kill anyone. It was meant to bring them out. "Stay in!" "Silas!" roared, and Marin understood in the same instant that staying in was exactly what they wanted too, that there was no safe square on this board, that the fire pulled you out, and the open killed you, and the cabin would be next, and the smiling man had built a trap with no door in it. But the animals, the horses, Biscuit, the brown mare with the sweet temper, who had carried her up out of cold water, screaming in the flames, and Amos went for the barn. Of course he did, because Amos Calder loved few things in this world, and most of them had 4 legs, and a man does not stand at a window and listen to that. Not Amos, and he was out the door and across the gold-lit snow before Silas could stop him. And the shapes at the tree line raised their rifles, and the night came apart. What happened in the next minutes, Marin would never be able to put in a straight line, not after, not ever, because terror does not store itself in order. It stores in pieces. The flat, hard crack of guns. Amos reaching the barn door and hauling it wide, and a wall of heat and smoke pouring out, and the horses bolting free through it, manes alight into the dark. Micah at the window firing steady and grim with Nell pushed flat under the table. Silas in the doorway, an enormous shadow against the burning. His rifle answering the tree line. Shot for shot, buying his brother every second he could with his own body for a shield. And Marin with the spare rifle at the third window, the one Amos had taught her, putting shot after shot into the muzzle flashes at the trees, her hands sure even as the rest of her shook. Because Amos had taught her and she would not waste it, not tonight, not with him out there in the open. Amos got the last horse free. And then Amos went down. She saw it. She saw the big, lean shape of him stagger at the barn door, saw him grab his own leg, saw him drop to one knee in the gold snow with the fire roaring behind him and the guns winking at him from the dark, and she heard Silas make a sound she had never heard a man make a sound with no words in it at all. And Silas Calder ran into the open to get his brother. No cover, no plan, just a giant in a nightshirt, crossing 40 feet of killing ground through a hail of lead, because that was his brother on his knees in the snow. And there are men who calculate odds and men who do not, and the Calders did not. Marin stopped breathing and fired faster. Micah came to the doorway and added his gun. And the 2 brothers together laid down such a wall of fire on that tree line that the dark shapes flinched and ducked and lost their aim. For the 3 seconds Silas needed to reach Amos, get a great arm around him and haul him bodily back toward the cabin. The both of them stumbling, Amos cursing Silas, roaring the snow kicking up in little fountains all around their feet. They made the door. They fell through it. Micah slammed it and barred it, and they were inside, all of them alive, and the barn was a pillar of fire, lighting up the whole mountainside, and Amos was bleeding bad onto the floor. She had scrubbed his leg torn open below the knee, and Marin was on him before she decided to be, her hands already pressing, already tearing cloth, already doing the thing her body knew how to do. Keep pressure. Pressure. He is bleeding, but it is not the big vessel. If it were the big vessel, he would be gone already, so it is not so. He lives. So keep pressure and breathe, and do not you dare fall apart now, not now, fall apart later. There is no later. Keep pressure. He is hit bad, she said, but he will keep if we stop the bleeding and the fever stays off. And then she heard the voice from outside. Friendly again, picnic again. Hello, the cabin. Hollis Dern. But not Dern, alone this time. Because behind Dern's friendly call came another voice, and this one she had heard exactly once before, across a frozen square, ordering numbers like a man flicking lint, and the sound of it now turned the blood in her body to creek ice. Edmund Crane had come up the mountain himself. I had never done that before, never dirtied his soft gloves with the doing, and the fact that he had come in person in the night told Marin more than any threat could have told her that he was frightened. Truly frightened for the first time, because a man who sends others does not come himself until he believes there is something up that mountain worth more than his own clean hands. Miss Hartwell Crane called. His voice was smooth, cultured, almost kind. The voice that had ruined a dozen women and buried God knew how many. "I believe you have something of mine," he said. "A page. From a private book. Your father took it the thief before his unfortunate accident. I have been very patient about its return. I have been patient for months. But patience, like my barn fire, has its limits, and I am afraid we have reached them tonight." Silas moved toward the door. Marin caught his arm, hard, and held it. "Wait," she breathed. "He is talking. As long as he is talking, he is not burning the cabin. He came up here himself. Why? Think. Because he needs the page back, and he cannot get it from ashes. He cannot burn us out until he has it in his hand. Which means we have a thing he wants more than he wants us dead. Which means. Oh, she knew what to do now. She knew it whole, the way she had known how to stop the bleeding, the way she had known how to keep her chin up under a sack. The plan arrived in her all at once, terrible and complete, and the worst part of it, the part that made her sick, was that it would work. "I will give it to you," Marin called out. The cabin went silent. Silas's head snapped toward her. Micah stared. Even Amos Gray on the floor opened his eyes. "What are you doing?" Silas said very low. "Trust me," she breathed back. "Please, for once, let me be the one who. Just trust me. I have a thing none of you have. He thinks I am a parcel. He has always thought I was a parcel. So let me be a parcel one last time, the most expensive parcel he ever tried to steal." She raised her voice again, and she made it shake, and the shake was real, and she let it carry. Let him hear it, let him taste it. "You can have your page," she called. "I do not want to die for it. I do not want these people to die for it. I have it here, the page and a letter, all of it, and I will bring it to you myself in the open where you can see my hands. If you give me your word, these men and that child walk free." A pause from the dark. Because that was the thing about Crane. He liked a deal. He had built his whole rotten life on deals, on paper, on the appearance of the lawful and the agreed, and a woman offering him a clean exchange in front of witnesses spoke to him in his own native tongue. "You have my word," Crane said. His word. As if the thing meant anything coming from him. But she did not need it to mean anything. She needed something else entirely. Marin turned to Silas, and she spoke fast and low words, tumbling the plan, pouring out of her faster than she could shape it pretty. "He will not shoot me in the open while he thinks I am bringing the page," she said. "He needs it in his hand. He will let me walk right up to him. And the marshal, Silas. Holt is at the way station down the North Fork, an hour's hard ride. He swore he would keep close and made us promise to send a rider the moment Crane moved. So Micah rides the back trail now while Crane is fixed on me out front, and he brings Holt and brings him fast. And I keep Crane talking. I keep that smooth-talking man talking in front of all his hired guns until the law gets here, and I get him to say it the truth out loud where men can hear, because a hired gun will swear to whatever keeps him off a rope, and once they hear what he really is, Silas gripped her shoulders. "No," he said. "Not you. Me. I will take it out. He will shoot you on sight," she said, "and you know it. You are the threat. I am the parcel. That is the whole horror of it, and it is also the only door we have got. He will not waste a bullet on a frightened woman carrying him exactly what he wants. He will let me close. He has to let me close. And close is where I need to be." "Why?" Silas said. "Why do you need to be close?" And Marin Hartwell looked up at the man who had bought her off a wagon and never once tried the ladder, and she told him the rest of it, the bottom of it, the part that was a knife, because somebody has to make him confess in front of his own men and a federal marshal, she said. And the only person on this earth he will say the truth to is the one woman he is sure he has already beaten. He cannot help it. Men like him cannot help it. They have to tell you they won, so let him think he has won. Let him gloat, and let the law be standing in the trees when he does. Silence. The fire crackled outside. Amos breathed rough on the floor. Nell's wide eyes went from face to face, and Silas Calder, who had been too late for Eve, looked at the woman who was asking him to let her walk alone into the dark toward the man who had killed his sister, and Marin watched it cost him everything. He had watched the war in his face, the every instinct screaming to throw her behind him and take the bullets himself, the way he always had. And then he did the hardest thing that big, strong man had ever done in his life. He trusted her. "Micah," he said, not looking away from Marin. "Back trail. Now. Ride that horse to death if you have to. Bring Holt." Micah was already moving. He pressed his hand once to Marin's heart a benediction, and he slipped out the back window into the dark and was gone low and fast, a reader who could run after all when running was the whole world. And Marin took her father's letter and the ledger page in her two hands, and Silas stopped her at the door. "I did not say be careful. He did not say come back. He was not a man who said things, and there were no words anyway that were not too small." He took the wooden sparrow off the table, the little rough one he had carved, and he pressed it into her free hand and closed her fingers over it. "So you have got something to bring back," he said, and his voice broke on the last word. The unbreakable man broke clean in half, and Marin understood that this was the thing he could not say. All of it, his whole guarded heart, poured into a scrap of carved pine, because he had no other language for it. She put the sparrow in her pocket, against her hip, a small, warm weight in a cold world. "You wait," she said. "You wait for the marshal. You do not come out no matter what he says to me, no matter what I look like out there. You let me work. Promise me." "I promise nothing," Silas said. "Silas, I will wait as long as I can stand to," he said, which was the truest thing and the most he could give. And she took it because it was him, all of him, and she would not have traded it for an easy lie. She opened the door, and Marin Hartwell walked out into the burning dark alone, toward the smiling man with her dead father's justice in her hands and a wooden sparrow in her pocket and 3 armed killers and a barn on fire between her and the only home she had ever wanted. The snow was hot underfoot near the barn, and the air shook with the heat, and she walked through it slow, the papers held high in one hand where he could see them, and the spare rifle, low in the other muzzle, to the ground, carried the way a body carries a tool, and not a threat. His men watched her come, with their guns half raised. But a dozen armed men do not fear one woman walking slow with a rifle pointed at the snow, and the smiling man wanted what was in her right hand, far more than he feared what was in her left, so they let her come, and she fixed her eyes on the shape of him at the tree line, and made her legs carry her forward, one step at a time. Crane sat his horse like a king. Soft coat, soft gloves, even now, even here. Dern beside him with the knife smile. The hired guns spread in a loose half-circle, rifles ready watching her come. She stopped 10 feet from his horse. Close enough. There she said and held the papers up. Your page, my father's letter. Everything. Crane looked down at her from the saddle, and he smiled, and oh, it was a terrible thing, that smile. Gentle and warm and entirely without a soul behind it. The famous school teacher's daughter, he said. I confess I expected more. All this trouble, all this snow and fire and dead horses, over you. You really are a very small thing when one sees you up close. Smallest bird there is, Marin thought, and did not say. Everybody overlooks it. Give it here, Crane said, and put out one gloved hand. And Marin did not give it here. She held it just out of his reach, and she lifted her chin, and she said in the clear, carrying voice of a woman who had taught a room full of children to hear her over their own noise, "Tell me one thing first. You owe me one thing. You took my father. The least you can do is tell me to my face that you did it. You came all this way. Just say it." Crane laughed softly. "Vanity," he said. "Even now, you want a confession, a scene, some satisfaction to carry into the dark with you." "I want the truth," she said, once, out loud, from the man who buried it. And here it was, the thing she had wagered everything on. The thing her own dead father had warned her of in the very letter. In her hands, trust no one too kind too fast, but turn now into a weapon, because the same vanity that ruined those who trusted Crane was the crack in him she meant to drive a blade through. Because men like him cannot help it. Because he had won or thought he had, and a man who has won and cannot tell anyone has not really won at all. And Edmund Crane had been smiling his secret smile in 100 parlors for years with no one to tell how clever he had been. And here was a small doomed woman in the snow asking. "Your father," Crane said, and the warmth left his voice, and something colder and far more honest came into it. Something that had been waiting 2 years for an audience. "Your father was a sanctimonious little schoolmaster who would not take a fair offer. I needed a seal on a survey, a simple thing, a signature. He could have been a wealthy man. Instead, he lectured me about honesty in his little schoolroom with his little books. Step closer," the cold voice seemed to say to itself, drunk on its own telling. "She is going to die anyway. Tell her. Finally tell someone." "So I followed him up the Eagle Pass Road one evening," Crane said, and the smile was gone entirely now, and what was underneath it was the true face, the one no parlor had ever seen. "And I waited at the bend above the gorge. And when his horse came by, I stepped out and I took the bridle. And I led that animal 3 steps sideways, and the road was narrow, and the dark was kind, and your honest father and his honest horse went off the edge together, and it was ruled an accident by a sheriff I have owned for years. And I went home and I slept like a child. Because that, Miss Hartwell, is the difference between your father and me. He had principles. I have property." The fire roared. And Marin Hartwell let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 3 weeks, since the sack, since the rope, since the whole world told her she was cursed. Because she had it now. "Thank you," she said very quietly. And then she said it louder, much louder. The schoolteacher's voice thrown out across the burning yard to the dark trees beyond, to the tree line on the far side, the north side, the side the back trail came in on. Did you all hear that she called to the night? Did everyone hear what Mr. Crane just said? Crane's smile froze, and from the dark trees from the north, where no one had been looking, came the answer. I heard it. A voice, weathered, gray, calm as a held breath. Marshal Nathaniel Holt rode out of the pines with his star catching the firelight and his rifle level, and Micah Calder right behind him, and behind them more men, a deputy too, the Pruitt men from the way station, every honest gun Micah had been able to raise on a hard, dark ride, and they came out of the trees in a line that Crane's hired killers had never seen coming, because every eye had been on the small woman in the snow, the way she had planned, the way she had wagered her own life it would go. Crane wheeled his horse. His soft-gloved hand went under his good coat, because the smiling man understood all in one instant that he had done the one thing he had never done in 2 years in 3 states and a dozen ruined lives. He had said it out loud. He had been so sure of his win, so starved to tell it, that he had confessed murder in front of a United States Marshal and his own hired guns, and the hired guns were already lowering their rifles, already raising their hands, because no man on this earth gets paid enough to hang for someone else's killing. And the half-circle of killers melted in 5 seconds into a half-circle of men who had suddenly never met Edmund Crane in their lives. Hollis Dern dropped his gun first, and the smiling man was alone. Marin saw the gloved hand come out from under the coat with a pistol in it, and she saw the eyes, and she knew the way, you know whether, that he was not a man who would hang, that a man who slept like a child after murder would never let a rope take him, that he meant to take her with him into the dark out of pure spite, the last theft of a thieving life. The pistol came up, toward her, and there was no time for the marshal. No time for Silas, who was already through the cabin door and running too far too late, the way he had been too late once before, and could not bear to be again. There was only Marin, and the spare rifle still low in her hand, muzzle to the ground, the one Amos taught her on, because she was a school-teacher's daughter and not a fool, and she had never once meant to walk into the dark truly unarmed. She dropped to one knee and brought the muzzle up. In the same breath, braced sure, 3 shots in a knot on a far pine you will do, and the rifle came level on the smiling man as his pistol found her. 2 shots cracked the night as one, his and hers. Marin felt the wind of his bullet pass where her head had been a quarter second before she dropped, and Edmund Crane, who had property and no principles, who had slept like a child, who had buried a dozen women and 1 honest schoolmaster, and never once paid a copper for any of it, took her shot square in the chest and went backward off his fine horse into the burning gold snow. And he did not get up, and the gloved hands that had ruined so many lay open and empty at last, and the smile was gone and would not be coming back. The fire roared on, and the woman, the whole valley had called, cursed, knelt in the hot snow with the rifle still at her shoulder and her father's justice scattered white around her, and she did not lower the gun for a long moment, because she could not quite believe the dark had not taken her too. Then a great shadow reached her, and huge careful hands closed over the barrel and eased it down gentle, the way he had eased the rifle from her hands that first night. The riders came calling, and she would not stand down from the window. "You did good," Silas Calder said. His voice was wrecked. His face was wet now, finally the unbreakable man wet and unashamed in the firelight. And Marin Hartwell turned into his chest and let go of all of it. 3 weeks and 3 months and a dead father and a sack and a rope and a whole world that had told her she was poison, all of it. She let it pour out at last against the chest of a man who held her like she was the only solid thing in a burning world, and over her shoulder the marshal's men were already binding. Hollis Dern and Micah was running for the cabin, and his wounded brother and little Nell had appeared in the doorway, despite every order watching, and the barn burned down to a glowing skeleton against the dawn that was just now beginning to gray the eastern peaks. Winter air, clean again, and somewhere under the fading stars the freed horses of the Calder homestead slowed from their terror and stopped and turned and began one by one to walk back home. The trial came in the spring when the passes opened in the circuit court at the territorial seat, and it was not really a trial at all because there is not much to try when a United States Marshal and 4 sworn men and 3 hired guns turning state's evidence all heard a man confess to murder in his own cultured voice across a burning yard. But the truth of him, the whole truth, that came out at the trial, and Marin was there to hear it in a new dress in the front row, with Silas beside her and Micah beside him, and Amos on a cane. He swore he did not need, and the whole rotten root of it was dragged at last into the daylight. Holt put the ledger page into evidence, and he put the father's letter beside it, and he walked the court through the figures and the forged surveys and the deeds signed by dead women's hands, slow and plain the way a man lays fence, until even the jurors who had liked Edmund Crane could not look away from what they were seeing. And then he named him. Edmund Crane was not Edmund Crane. His real name was Josiah Thorne, and there was paper on him in 3 states going back 11 years, a trail of land fraud and forged deeds and false marriages and women dead or vanished from the Dakotas to the Colorado line. Crane in cold water, Mallory up north, Vane down south. One smiling man wearing a town-like a coat until the coat got dangerous, then shedding it and the name with it and moving on to smile somewhere new. And the proof that tied every alias into one hanging rope was the page a schoolteacher had torn from the devil's own book and hidden in a volume of poems for his daughter to carry to safety without ever knowing she carried it. And Silas Calder sat very still in the front row through all of it, because one of those shed names, Vane, was the name his sister Eve had breathed to him with the last clear breath she had 6 winters gone. The name he had hunted across half a territory and never run to ground, because the man had let it fall behind him like a snake skin long before Silas ever came looking. He had been chasing a dead name all that time. They all had, and the man who had worn it had been sitting in a front pew down in Coldwater, the whole while putting coin in the collection plate, while a motherless child grew up on a mountain, not knowing her mother's killer had a Sunday seat. Marin felt his big hand close hard over hers when the name was read. She did not look at him. She only turned her hand over under his and held on, and the 2 of them sat there, the 2 halves of the same long sorrow, and listened to the law say out loud at last the thing they had both bled for. The court was very quiet when Holt finished, and then the matron rose, Adeline Foss, come all the way from Coldwater, where she had spat at a cursed woman and drawn her skirts aside. Come now to the territorial seat in her good black dress, and she asked the judge if she might address the court, and she was permitted, and she stood, and she turned not to the judge but to Marin. I owe this woman an apology, Adeline Foss said, and the words came out of her like teeth pulled. I called her cursed. I helped the town believe it. I drew my skirts aside from her in the public square as she was sold like an animal, and I told myself I was a good and decent Christian woman while I did it. She stopped. Her chin trembled, but she finished. I was wrong, she said. God forgive me, I was wrong, and I have come to say so, where everyone who heard the lie can hear the truth. It was not enough. It could never be enough. But it was something, and Maren, who knew exactly what it cost a proud person to bend, gave the woman a single small nod and let it be. And that was the last of the smiling man. Josiah Thorne went where the law sends men like him, and the territory was clean of him at last. And somewhere in 3 states, women who had been called mad and loose and cursed read the news in the papers and understood perhaps for the first time that they had never been any of those things at all. They had only been in the path of a monster, and the monster was gone. So now you know how it ended for him. But the story is not quite finished, because a story about a cursed woman is never really about the curse. It is about what grows in the place where the curse used to be. And what grew up on that mountain in the seasons that followed is the part worth staying for. The summer came strong and green the way mountain summers do all at once, as if making up for the long white winter in a single generous breath. They rebuilt the barn, all of them. Even Amos, who could walk fine now and only kept the cane to point things with. The new barn went up bigger and better than the old raised by neighbors who came up the mountain to help, because a thing had changed in the valley below, and the Calder place was no longer the strange, hard homestead where the cursed woman hid. It was just a home, where good people lived, and good people, it turns out, get neighbors. Nell grew like the summer grass, and she read everything now, everything she could get her hands on, and Maren taught her, and then taught the Pruitt children when they rode up, and then by the next spring taught a whole roomful of mountain young in a one-room schoolhouse the brothers built down by the creek. Because a teacher is a teacher, and a school teacher's daughter had finally, after everything, become exactly what her father had been. I would have liked that. She thought it most mornings, watching the children file in. He would have liked that more than any justice, more than any verdict. The schoolhouse, the letters on the slate. The thing he died protecting, growing up green again in his daughter's hands. And Silas. It was a slow thing with Silas, the way the best things are slow. There was no grand moment. There was never going to be, not with that man. There was only a long, warm summer. Of small ones the meat left on her plate, the hand at the small of her back, the evenings on the porch, watching the dark come down closer and closer until the cold did not reach the side of her that was near him at all. And one evening in late summer with the valley gold below them and the first cool of autumn in the air, Maren stood at the porch rail and said, not looking at him, in a voice she kept very steady on purpose, "You know you never asked me to stay properly. You bought me off a wagon, and you put me in the loft, and you never once asked." Silas was quiet a while. "Figured you had your fill of being asked for," he said. "By men who wanted to own you, did not want to be one more." "And what if?" Maren said. She had to start again. Her steady voice was not so steady now. "What if I wanted to be asked?" she said. "Just once. By the right one. Because I have learned the word means something different when it is a choice and not a chain." And the big quiet man turned and looked at the woman the whole world had thrown away and he had pulled out of the cold. The woman who had walked alone into the dark to save him, the woman who carried a wooden sparrow in her apron pocket to this very day. And he did not get down on one knee because that was not him. He took her hand in both of his great scarred ones, the hands that told his whole story, and he held it like the most fragile and most valuable thing in all the world, and he said, "There is no preacher up here." "We do not need one," Maren said. And they did not. Under the open sky of the Bighorn Mountains, with the pines for witnesses and the creek for a hymn, and a 6-year-old girl grinning in the doorway, and two brothers standing back with their hats in their hands, and something suspiciously bright in Amos Calder's hard eyes, Maren Hartwell and Silas Calder made each other a quiet promise. No sack, no rope, no price, no owner, only a choice. Only two people who had each been broken in a different way by the same hard world, choosing freely with their eyes open to be whole together. The years went on, the way years do. The schoolhouse filled and emptied and filled again with mountain children who grew up able to read because of the woman who taught them. Nell became a young woman, and a fine one, with her dead mother's brightness and her 3 uncles' stubbornness and a new mother's gentleness all braided into one. And she never once in all her growing doubted that she was loved, which is the only inheritance that ever truly matters. And travelers passing through the high country would sometimes speak in the years after of a place up in the Bighorns, a homestead, a school, a tall, quiet man and a fair-haired woman who taught the children their letters and was known the whole valley over for her kindness and her spine in equal measure. They said she had come up that mountain once long ago, sold and shamed with a sack over her head, and a whole town calling her cursed. And they said that if you were ever fool enough in her hearing to call any woman cursed, or ruined, or worthless, or past saving, the fair-haired school-teacher would fix you with a pair of cornflower eyes that had seen the very bottom of the world and come back up unbroken. And she would say very quietly in a voice that had taught 1,000 children to listen, "There is no such thing as a cursed woman. There are only women the world has not yet stopped lying about." And then she would go home up the trail, to the man who had bought her freedom, and never once tried to own it and the family that grew in the place where a curse used to be. Because that, in the end, was the whole truth of it. She had never been broken. Not once. Not on the wagon. Not under the sack. Not in the cell. Not in the snow. The world had only told her she was. And the day she stopped believing it was the day she became the strongest thing on that whole mountain.